Welcome to Question Mark, the podcast, exploring the greatest story ever told with open minds and open hearts.
We light it up, we won't come down, and the sun can't stop us now. Watching it come true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show, where it's covered in all the colored lights, and the runaways are on in the night. Impossible comes true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show.
Welcome everybody again to Question Mark, the podcast that deals with the Gospel of Mark. And today I've got a wonderful friend and a guest to introduce you to you today, and his name is Peter Butt, and it's going to be an amazing show. I'm so excited about this one because it's one of the most powerful stories in the whole of Scripture that we're going to be looking at. But before we go any further, Peter, can I ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, and maybe a little bit about how you know me? That might be quite fun. But whatever you want to do in terms of introducing yourself, please feel free.
Okay, yes. Well, as you can see, I've been around a few years. At least I've still got hair, but it has changed colour. I've been in Christian ministry now for over 50 years. 1970 was a momentous year for me. I got married to my wife. We're still married 52 years on. And we started together in leadership in a church in North London in the town of Barnet, and have been involved in all kinds of different Christian ministries since, which is how we met Steph, of course, because 25 years ago we moved down to Southampton to develop a teaching and training ministry that has become known as School of Ministries International. We're in a number of nations across, particularly across Africa and Asia. And in just a few years ago, Steph travelled with me to Mumbai in India and introduced his Mark passage, his Mark drama to the church there in Mumbai. Before he became so well known. So I've known Steph for a number of years and always appreciated his fellowship, his deep commitment to Jesus, his commitment to prayer. And we've had some good times of fellowship, friendship and interaction, and even ministry together over the years.
I've got to echo what Peter just said, because Pete has been an amazing mentor and friend, as I hinted earlier, and someone who I look up to, someone who's got an amazing capacity for preaching and to bless others around the world. And he's been an incredible source of encouragement to me, and I know to lots of other people as well. I think he feels that's one of his special callings, to encourage others in the faith who are, attempting to do amazing things for God, I guess, in God's strength. So, Peter, thank you for all you've done for me. The only thing I'd have against you, of course, is that you're a Tottenham fan. That's not that I'm against you. You're very harsh about Leeds United, and that's why I support.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Yes, I have a kind of order. I'm very much in line with the scriptures where I want to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and then I love my wife and my family, and I want to take that responsibility seriously too, and then probably serving the Lord in the church is next, and then definitely a fanatical follower of football, and particularly Tottenham Hotspur. I was just 10 or 11 years old in 59, 60, then 61, when Spurs, of course, were the greatest team on the face of the earth. Well, for a few years anyway, and we've been trying to live up to that ever since. But I haven't seen Spurs win the league for over 60 years now. 61 was the last time we won the what would be now the Premier League, so we pray every year and hope every year. Unfortunately, our expectations are dashed by others overtaking us on the way.
The fact that other people who believe in God don't also follow Tottenham, I can't understand, given what you just said, Peter. It's obvious that everyone needs to follow Spurs.
Well, absolutely. I mean, our last manager who got the sack, his surname was Spirit. So unfortunately, it all went wrong. But I had great hopes that with a surname like that, we couldn't fail. But unfortunately, it didn't work out that way.
Oh, what a shame. We could talk all day about the respective merits of Leeds and Spurs, but perhaps we better get on with the podcast. And today, today, as you will know, we are looking at Mark chapter 5 and the first few verses of that chapter, 1 through to 19. So without further ado, I'm going to ask my friend Lucy Warner to read it for us.
Mark chapter 5, verses 1 to 20, New International Version. Jesus restores a demon-possessed man. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him any more, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs. Allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man, and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed.
So there you go. That's the passage. Now, in many of the podcasts, if you've listened before, what we've tried to do is narrow the questions down to two main questions. The first being, what would this passage have meant to Mark's first audience? And the second one is, what is the relevance of this passage for us today in the 21st century? And I hope in the next few minutes, Peter and I will be able to establish something about those two questions that might be of help to you. So Peter, as we've listened to that passage, what's your first reaction as you think about it?
Well, I mean, it is just one of the most dramatic stories in the Bible. Of course, it's very challenging too, on many levels, challenging the whole thought of demon possession, that a person could be inhabited by spirits, evil spirits, and their behavior could become so horrific that they could gain sort of this kind of strength. And of course, we see films like The Hulk, where you see this ordinary man turned into this extraordinarily powerful being, and images of that kind of thing arrest you as you read it. And I guess for every generation, those who first heard it and those who read it now. There is this very powerful passage of a man completely taken over by this force, this evil force, who begins to move in extraordinary ways and begins to do extraordinary things, and so it is a very, very challenging, graphic, dramatic story, which is in line with so much in the book of Mark around this story, both sides of it. There are just these dramatic miracles, and it's almost like the intention that we would see. Chapter 4 ends with Jesus calming a troubled sea, and then we move on into a young girl being raised from the dead, and a woman who's had dreadful sickness being healed. So there are these kind of series of remarkable, dramatic, powerful events where Jesus intervenes in people's lives and transforms them. And
I'm glad you said that.
In that kind of continuity in
yes.
Mark 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah, I'm really glad you say that, because I agree entirely. And I think, interestingly, this idea of demons in particular is a kind of thing, that a thread that goes right from the beginning, chapter 1, right through to the beginning of chapter 5 in particular. And this is the most extreme example of it. Not that he didn't perform other miracles, as you say, but even the storm at sea, there's a kind of element of some degree of a fight against a supernatural force, because in those days the sea would have been considered the terrain of demons and of darkness and of evil. So this is like just one of a series. I mean, right from the beginning, though, I guess we better grasp a nettle here, because, since you mentioned about the fact this man is being possessed, how are we as a 21st century reader, as readers in the 21st century, meant to take this? Are we meant to take it literally? Do you believe that this is actually, the case, that people can be possessed in this way? Or is this more like a superstition belonging to the first century? What's your thought?
Well, because I've traveled in Africa and again in Asia, I've actually seen demonstrations of this nature. I've not seen such a powerful one as this. I've not seen someone who broke chains, but I've seen people who were overtaken by demonic power. I've seen them shake off 5 or 6 people, in Africa in one particular occasion, I remember. And they, as Jesus did, went through the process of what we call exorcism and cast the demons out of a guy. And as in the book of Mark, he was sat in his right mind. I think for us in the West, it's very difficult with all our sophisticated medical understanding and our ways of treating people with mental illness and sickness and serious kind of schizophrenic type diseases. We say, oh well, you can treat them with medication. But I think the evidence from particularly the developing world would be that there is still evidence of people who are taken over by demonic forces and need this kind of deliverance.
I think it is wrapped up, isn't it, with how one thinks about the existence of good and evil. And I think for me, the fact that this is a very strange episode from our own Western cultural point of view doesn't mean to say that it's not possible. And I can't rule out in any shape or form the existence of evil in the world, how men can be taken over in one way or another. And forces of evil are quite obviously encountered in history through, for example, the Holocaust and other examples. So for me, it's not something I've seen a lot of, although I have experienced a bit, but I do bow to your greater experience, because you're a well-traveled man and you've seen a lot of, well, some of this, haven't you, in your own experience?
Yeah, well, I have, but I think also there are different levels. Obviously, this guy, he says, what is your name? And he says Legion, because he's, he has embraced or imbibed a number of demonic forces. But I think, we see evidence of it in some atrocious behavior that it cannot be explained by just saying, oh, well, they had a bad upbringing or a bad experience or are not quite mentally stable. I mean, people do commit some of the most atrocious crimes. I mean, even in our day, some of the behavior of recent days in the ISIS kind of situation, just inhumane acts. And you think, how on earth do they do that? And people even say, oh, they must be possessed. And I believe they are.
Yeah.
And that there are still people who need to be set free. Somehow, I don't think the normal human being, whether they're a Christian or not, is possessed or gets possessed by any demonic forces. But I think those that open themselves up to extreme behaviors in any form actually open themselves up to be impacted by demonic forces, and therefore will need deliverance, being set free.
Yeah. I know not everyone will agree with what you say, but you make a very powerful case. For me, as you speak, Peter, it feels a bit scary, to be honest, but then I'm comforting myself by what happens in this story, that over and above this horrible power which we've been talking about is the figure of Jesus, who has power over that. I think it's an interesting feature of the story for me that in verse 4 it talks about the demon-possessed man, as no one was strong enough to subdue him. And that word strong is repeated in Mark's gospel quite a few times earlier on in the story. And the stronger one it's referred to there in the story is Jesus himself. So there is one stronger than this man, or this demon-possessed man anyway. So there is hope, isn't there, for not only for individuals who might have come a cropper in this way, but for the world. And the way you've described it, some of the troubles that we experience as a community, and how when we experience wars and horrendous things that humans do to each other, there is hope because Jesus himself is stronger than all of that.
Yes, and of course, the verse that came to my mind, particularly about the chains, when it talks about, they tried to constrain him with chains, but he broke them off, was verses from Luke's gospel, where in Luke chapter 4, it talks about Jesus, and he declares, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because God has anointed me. And one of the phrases there is to set the captives free.
Yes.
And to release those who are bound.
Yes.
And so, that's the manifesto, if you like, of Jesus, was to come and release people who were bound, whether they were bound by sickness or sin or by demons. Jesus came to set the captive free. And that verse came immediately to mind as I was reading, about the chains, that, that's what Jesus does. He releases people who are bound, whatever. And here we have an extreme case. I've never seen anybody personally this possessed, if you like. Absolute lunatic madness, scary, frightening. And if Jesus can do that for him, then he can do that for lesser situations, and he is still setting people free.
I think that's right. I think we would agree, wouldn't we, that Jesus is the archetypal, the arch liberator. And when I think about this man and think about freedom in the way you described, I do see that that it's an example of Jesus's power over all kinds of captivity.
Yes.
And I think as human beings, as individuals, we are captive in many, many different ways. We you know, we are captive and addicted to so many different things. And Jesus can do that for us as individuals. But what comes across for me, and I'll explain why perhaps a bit later on, but from this passage, what comes across to me even more strongly is the idea that whole societies can be oppressed as well. It's not just individuals.
Yes.
And the reason I say that, I was going to mention it later, but the reason I say that is because there's this sense for me that if this passage was being listened to by people around at the time it was written, so we're talking about maybe 70 AD, 71 AD, that was a time of incredible oppression.
Yes.
People were under captivity, and there were clear overtones in my view to that kind of oppression as well. The Roman occupation, the political and economic oppression that people were under. There's a sense here Jesus is a liberator of that too. I don't want to kind of say everything at once because I won't give you a chance to have a word in edgeways, but there is something about that here in this story.
Yeah, I do believe that is absolutely so. You know that you know the truth that I mean I'm going with the normal understanding that John Mark wrote this gospel as he listened to Peter preach and to Peter share, and perhaps even to Peter dictating firsthand the stories that have happened, you know. And it's this graphic sense of Jesus coming to people who are in need, whatever that need is, and setting them free. So when you talk about liberation there and being set free, I'm thinking about my father-in-law, you know, who is approaching 100 years of age now. And when he was 35, he had a dramatic encounter with Jesus. He wasn't possessed by demons, but he had a violent temper. He was a drunkard. Used to beat his wife because he was in a drunken state. He used to smoke 70 roll-ups a day, you know, and so, you know, he was quite a character, and he wasn't kind. My wife says when she was a little girl, she used to go and hide in her bedroom when he came home from work because she was actually frightened of him. And he had an encounter with Jesus in the early 50s, mid 50s, around the time that Billy Graham came preaching the gospel of freedom from sin and God delivering you from addiction, and he was totally and completely transformed overnight. So, you know, this picture of this man sitting in his right mind, it still happens, you know. And my father-in-law was set free from alcoholism. His temper changed. I mean, he's the most gentle kind of character. He stopped smoking immediately because of this powerful encounter with Jesus. And you know, there's a parallel there for us today. So many people struggling with addictions, with mental health issues, with other problems, and here is Jesus, the liberator, who comes to us in our need and sets us free. And I'm sure to the people listening or reading John Mark's account or hearing it read, as it would have been in many occasions, there was this, wow, if Jesus can do that, then he can do it for me. You know, I'm sure that was part of the strength of this story.
I agree entirely. And as you speak, you know, I'm thinking back even to my own story, which wasn't as dramatic as your father-in-law, was it? Or
yes,
yeah, wasn't as dramatic as his, but I was in a place where I would have thought I was okay, you know, everything was going along swimmingly, but looking back, I can see it with the benefit of hindsight, it was on a road to nowhere, really. And addiction would be quite a strong word to use, but I was addicted to all sorts of different things which weren't healthy, I wasn't into drugs or drink or anything like that, but there were other things. You can get addicted to stuff that isn't healthy. It leads you on a road to nowhere, as I say. And Jesus, he came into my life completely, surprisingly, out of the blue, and he completely transformed it, again, like your father-in-law. So you're absolutely right. I think it could be said this man represents each one of us in many ways, how we all, each one of us, need to have that freedom, because whatever the strength of our disease, whether it's something physical, something mental, or whether it's something to do with who we are as individuals, caught up, bound up, somehow not really feeling that we're living the life we were made to live, created to be. Even that, Jesus has come here and he has rescued, which is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing that really gripped me as I've been thinking about the story this week. This whole idea of, if Jesus can do that, for that guy, his condition and state, then he can do it for me. And it gives a sense of hope. For everyone, however far they feel they've gone, however far they feel they've slipped, however far they feel their addiction or their behavior patterns have driven them, that actually Jesus can break the hold, the power, the chains, whatever language, it's all there in this story, and set people free.
It's interesting that the man himself doesn't necessarily, well, at least the man when he was possessed doesn't necessarily want to be freed. And that's something we can maybe look back on. I want to bring another possibility into our conversation, though. And, as you know, I do this one man solo word for word dramatization of Mark's gospel. And I guess I wouldn't be being very responsible unless I try to understand what I'm speaking about. And in particular, recently, I've joined something called the Gospel of Mark workshop, which is an online kind of academic series of classes. And the more but anyway, whatever the case, the more I study this, the more I'm seeing other things in this, or different things. And I've got to bring those to the table as well, because I think they are relevant to what we've said, but perhaps even widening the scope a bit further. So the key point here is, and I don't know whether you agree, I can imagine some people would disagree, but the key point is when Jesus asks him, what is his name? And the man says, his name is Legion. Now, for most of my Christian life, when I've seen that, I've thought, well, obviously the man had many devils in him, and that's why he called himself Legion. It just to illustrate, and that's what Mark said. My name is Legion, he replied, for we are many.
Yeah.
But there's something else going on here, I think. Now, the more I read about it, the word Legion for a first century audience, who, as I understand it, and I know people disagree with this as well, but I understand this particular audience who were listening for the first time to this story would have probably been living in a similar area. Back in 68 AD, that area, the Gerasenes area, was occupied by Roman troops. 1,000 people were killed. 1,000 men were killed after they were occupied. The women and children were sold into slavery. So we're talking about an audience possibly who were deeply familiar with the Roman way of dealing with their enemies. And in this case, it would have been the Jewish rebellion or the Jewish revolt of 66 to 70. So if the gospel's written about 70, perhaps, even if it wasn't intended, I think people who were listening to this would have been thinking about Rome, even at the mention of the word legion.
Yes.
And the thing about this story is it's almost comical, because the words that come up in the Greek are all to do with soldiers and armies and conquest. So when the demons asked Jesus, send us among the pigs, send us into the pigs, the word send is a word you would use, a commander would use to send troops into battle. And when it says he gave them permission, it's the same thing. It's about a military commander. So there's something about the military going on here very strongly in the imagery. And for a first century audience, I know this isn't my view, and this is certainly the view of some theologians, to listen to this story about a man who's possessed by a legion of demons, they wouldn't have escaped from noticing that actually this is a bit like their own country, occupied, possessed. And Jesus is coming, apparently, to drive them out. But what he doesn't do is have a fight with them. He drives them into the pigs. The pigs, we could go on and on, but the pigs, what they end up doing is going into the sea.
Yeah.
Which is when the man says, do not, swear to God that you do not torture me. That phrase torture is all about the end times of when the evil one will be cast into the abyss. So it's like all these things going on. It's about something about Rome. It's something about evil. None of the things we said before are wrong, but there's something else going on here for me about power. So, I mean, again, I could go on. It's just that for me, Mark's gospel seems to be as much as it is about individuals who are set free, it's also about communities that are set free and the world being set free, and about how the world is often, we're under oppression, not just from our sin, not only just from the fact that death exists, not only for the fact that there's disease, not only for the fact there's addiction, there's also political and there's economic oppression. And here's an example of Jesus doing something about that as well. Now, I know this might sound quite radical to you, Pete, but I have to say, this fits in. This really does fit in with the rest of Mark's gospel so far. And the key point is in the previous chapter, because the issue of what the kingdom of God is like when he talks about it in the parables, it's not the same as the normal way of doing things in humanity. And there's a bit in chapter 4 which talks about the rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer. It's when Jesus says, consider carefully what you hear. With the measure you give, it will be given to you. And even more, whatever is not given to you will be taken away from you, or words to that effect. And what Jesus is saying, that's the traditional way of looking at life. The rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer. But he says, don't listen to that. That's not what the kingdom of God is like. It's not about getting richer at the expense of other people. It's not about having power over other people. It's about something completely different. So anyway, there is my little sermon.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can't really comment because I haven't heard that aspect before. Any of my study hasn't revealed anything. I'm not suggesting it's not true, but the close connection with the Roman thing. I mean, obviously, the word legion connects with that. So I perfectly accept that there was always, something more in what Jesus has said. I mean, I'm intrigued by the pigs.
Yes.
And the significance of the pigs. It's the only time in the gospel pigs are mentioned, I think, anywhere.
Yeah.
And of course, it's like, anybody having anything to do with pigs is not following the revealed pathway of walking with God, of knowing God in the Jewish tradition. And so, there's that whole thing as well about the unclean animal there and the dealing with sin and these people, whether they're Jews or not, according to God's word, God's law, the eating of pork was was not acceptable. And of course, that was, I don't believe God was saying, "Oh well, pork's really nice. I don't want you to enjoy it." It was because in those days, without proper understanding of keeping pork, that you would open yourself. I believe it was a protective law that saved you from being poisoned. I don't think it applies to us in our present day, and certainly under grace. But here were people who, and whether there were Jews amongst them, there's the general view is that they were Syrian cities, the 10 cities there, but whether they were a mixture of Jews and Gentiles is interesting. Were they backslidden Jews? In other words, Jews not really following God, and and the intrigue of why did they then want Jesus to go away?
Yes.
And I think all of those things that we could talk for hours about. Some of them I think are very relevant. So people want God and want the blessing of God, but actually, are they prepared to live right? Because it might cost them something.
I mean, the whole thing about why it was that they wanted Jesus to leave, it is odd, isn't it? And you raised another question about the pigs. Why pigs? And I know that there are going to be people listening to this podcast who are going to be saying, "But that's not that's really cruel to the pigs. That's horrible." In this day and age, we want to conserve our livestock, and many people don't want to eat meat and don't want to have pigs or any other kind of animal being slaughtered. Thank you very much. And here's Jesus, who's supposed to be the God of love, who is destroying them apparently, or letting them be destroyed. So there are all sorts of questions, aren't there? I mean, I think for me, the key point, maybe tying some of it together, is the fact that, as you mentioned, the pigs are associated with uncleanliness, and indeed with Gentiles. And the fact is that this man also lived in tombs which would have been unclean for the Jews as well. And the fact that he's kind of restored into his right mind, and then Jesus tells him to go home, it's almost like Jesus has freed him from that stigma as well, that he's been outcast because of what's happened to him. And now he's been, like in so many of the stories in this gospel, Jesus is bringing him back to be accepted in society, not just healing, but actually establishing the person again in his own proper identity and community. So, I mean, as far as the pigs are concerned, it is completely weird. One thing that may be an answer is that if you mention pigs being in a particular location, it's possibly not going to be a place where it's predominantly Jewish. So, and the fact that Jesus is on that side of the lake, also it's mostly, well, at least some, I wouldn't say mostly, but it's a mixed population. Jesus is reaching out not just to Jews but to Gentiles as well, which is really significant when we think about his overall ministry. It's not just for Israel, but for the world.
No, that's absolutely right. But for me, the fascinating challenge of all that as well is, they then come to Jesus and they want him to go away from their coasts, and of course there's some different opinions about that. There are those who say, well, it's because he took away their livelihood. I'm not convinced about that. I think it's more likely they were frightened by this demonstration of the power of God. I am not very comfortable when I've been in situations where people have been set free from demonic activity. It is very, very challenging, and a lot of people are very uncomfortable, and I encourage people not to watch horror films, for example. I think it's foolish, because I do believe in the reality of the presence and power of evil, and I don't think you should open yourself up to it, and because it's not a pleasant thing, and it's beyond our understanding, and we get uncomfortable with. In Africa, there's still a lot of fear around sort of witch doctors, and they still hold power there with their, activities into occult behavior and charms and all kinds of things. And I feel personally that it was more fear than anything else, that they said we can't cope with this. They weren't prepared for it, or maybe it was related to the pigs because they understood the displeasure of God, as it were, in terms of the eating of pork and whatever in that context, and weren't prepared to pay the price to live how God wanted them to live. And I know so many people who God has helped and blessed, but they've not gone on to serve him, to follow him, to live the way he wants them to live, and there's something there that's challenging too for all of us.
I agree. I personally agree with you specifically about the fear thing. I think that happens quite a lot in this gospel. It's not the first time. Just in the previous chapter, the end of chapter 4, the disciples were terrified by what Jesus did when it came to calming the storm. It's like this sense of utter terror or awe. It's not quite the right word because that's quite positive. It's more than that. It's something we can't even cope with this. It's just too much. I mean, that's fascinating. Wow, there's so much else we could talk about here, but I just wonder, have we perhaps done all we need to for today, Peter? Is there something else that's in your mind that we may need to look at?
I'm kind of, they're the things that had grabbed my attention as I read the chapter, but the overwhelming focus is on Jesus, not on the man who had demons, on the power of Jesus, on the presence of Jesus. And I can just imagine Peter just waxing. I mean, it's interesting that Mark's gospel has a much more graphic and longer description of this event. It appears in Matthew and Luke, but somehow this really grabbed Peter's attention, and as he saw the extraordinary demonstration of the power of Jesus. And I guess that would be a brilliant note to kind of come near the end with this wonderful, powerful picture of Jesus, the Son of God, setting people free. That's what he'd come for. That's, the rationale of everything that he did and whatever was that people might come back into a relationship with God. And we have this wonderful picture of this man who's tormented, sitting in his right mind, and encouraged by Jesus to go back and tell them what great things the Lord has done for him.
And I think it's I can't top what you've just said. I think that really does sum up what we've been talking about. But it does raise for me one more thing about the man. The man wants to go to be with Jesus. He wants to join him on the boat. Jesus doesn't let him. But what the man's asking for is basically to become an apostle, to join the others. But he's sent out back to his own country, and he's given the same job. He's sent out to proclaim. And what's interesting about his proclamation is Jesus says to him, tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. And then the man goes back and goes to his hometown, other towns, and he tells how much Jesus has done for him. So that really makes the identification, which I think is plainer and plainer as I read it, of Jesus not only as the Son of God, but God himself in human flesh.
Yes.
And that's the most remarkable thing, isn't it?
Yes. Amen.
If you enjoyed this episode of Question Mark and don't want to miss any future episodes, be sure to click on the subscribe button. This also means other people can find the podcast and join the conversation too. We'd also love if you could leave a review so we know what was good and what we can improve for future episodes. If you want to find out more about I Am Mark, Stephen Smart's solo word-for-word dramatisation of Mark's Gospel, go to www.sleek.bio/IamMark, where you can sign up for free for his newsletter and a whole host of other goodies. Join us and our special guests next time, where we'll continue to explore the greatest story ever told together. If you want to get involved with the podcast or have any questions or comments in the meantime, please do get in touch using the I Am Mark social media channels. We'd love to hear from you.
We light it up, we won't come down, and the sun can't stop us now. Watching it come true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show, where it's covered in all the colored lights, and the runaways are on in the night. Impossible comes true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show.